Wait, before you take that pile of clothes to be donated or throw away fabric scraps, think again. They can be repurposed into something super cozy and functional. First, I took a piece of canvas I thrifted and folded it in half. Then I used the largest bowl I had and measured 3 inches from the edge of the bowl, then used a fabric pencil to make marks. I then connected the marks to form a circle, pinned the pieces together, and cut out the circles. Then I gathered several clothing items I had ready for donation and began deconstructing them and salvaging any zippers, elastic, buttons, and buckles I could. Then I cut them into 4 by 4 inch squares. Additionally, because I have a sewing business, I had several bags of fabric scraps that I was able to utilize and also cut into 4 by 4 inch squares. I made sure to save all the scraps from cutting the squares too. In terms of the fabric for this project, you can use anything from old towels, blankets, bed sheets, curtains, or whatever you can find around your home or the thrift store. Once everything was cut, I found the circumference of the 2 large circles, which was 66 inches. Therefore, to create a piece of fabric long enough to go around the circle, I needed it to be 66 inches long, and I wanted the height to be 16 inches. To begin creating the piece of fabric the length of the circumference, I first created a grouping of 18 4 by 4 inch squares. I laid them out in 3 rows of 6. Then I tried to lay them in a pattern that made sense color-wise and treated the rows as 2 groups of 9. Next, I started in the top left corner of the pattern and began sewing together the squares in the top row. I started by laying the second square on the first with right sides together and sewed them together on the right side using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, making sure to forward and backward stitch at the beginning and end. Then I opened the connected squares up, laid the third square on top of the second square with right sides together, and sewed them together on the right side using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I continued this pattern until the first row was complete, then did the same thing on the next 2 rows. I ironed the back of each row to lay the seams flat, then laid the second row on top of the first row with right sides together and sewed them together along the long side using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then I placed the third row on top of the second with right sides together and sewed those rows together. Next, I sewed all 3 panels together on the short sides to create one long piece. Next, I laid out a flannel sheet that I thrifted, folded it in half, laid one of the circles on top, and cut around them. Then I laid the sheet in a single layer, placed the long quilted piece on top, pinned the pieces together, and cut around it to create a lining piece. I sewed on the lining pieces using a 1/4 inch seam allowance to the quilted piece and 2 circles, then trimmed away any excess fabric around the edges. Next, I added an invisible zipper using a salvage zipper I had on hand. I opened the seam and pressed it open, then placed the zipper upside down directly over the seam, then taped it down with masking tape. I switched to a zipper foot and sewed all the way around the right, bottom, and left side of the zipper. I removed the tape, then flipped it over and used a seam ripper to rip the seams from the bottom of the zipper to the top. Then I sewed around the zipper again, about 1/4 inch away from the first stitches to finish securing the zipper. Next, I took one of the lined circles and placed it on top of the quilted piece, right sides facing together, and began pinning the pieces together, making sure the edges lined up as I went around the circle. I sewed them together using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, then went around once more with my serger to give the seam more strength. I repeated the same process with the other opening and other circle. Once everything was sewn together, I opened up the zipper, turned the piece right side out, and pushed out the seams with a crochet hook. Then I began stuffing the shell with all my fabric scraps. Now I have a comfy upcycled poof footrest that cost me nothing to make because it was made entirely of materials I already had on hand.
Sometimes the best fabric is right in front of you. Grab a new or gently used shower curtain and let's create home decor. For this project, buy multiple pool noodles from the dollar store. You'll need at least 8 to 10 noodles. To start, make 4 of your pool noodles longer by cutting off a small section from another pool noodle and attaching it to a long pool noodle with duct tape. I went for a measurement of 68 inches with each lengthened pool noodle. Now, take the 4 lengthened pool noodles and create a circle from each one. Next, measure the height of the 4 stacked pool noodles. Take this measurement, mine was 9 inches, and cut out pool noodle pieces to size. Take these noodle pieces and place them standing on one end inside the stacked pool noodle circles. Fill the center of the rings with the cut pool noodle pieces. Now take some duct tape and start to cover the top and sides of the filled pool noodles. Press the tape onto the noodles as you go so the tape stays secure. Continue until the top and sides are covered with tape. Then flip the noodles over and tape the bottom as well. Once most of the noodles are covered with tape, you can cover exposed areas with small pieces of tape. I used white duct tape from the dollar store because the background of my shower curtain that I'm going to use in a moment is white. Take your freshly washed shower curtain and place the tape-wrapped pool noodles on top. Pull one corner of the shower curtain and wrap it and secure it to the bottom of the noodles. I used a staple gun, but you can use a hand stapler or even more duct tape if you want to secure. I wasn't sure if the staples would actually hold onto the pool noodles, but they stapled and held beautifully to the duct tape covering the noodles. You can leave your ottoman as is at this point, but adding a little extra is fun. I wrapped the side of the ottoman with cotton rope and tied a simple knot to secure. Place your new poof ottoman in front of a chair and enjoy putting your feet up in style at the end of the day. I hope this inspired you to take a shower curtain and some pool noodles and create a unique and stylish poof ottoman. Head to your local hardware store and buy a sheet of OSB. First, cut the OSB into 15-inch squares. You will need 3 of these squares. Apply wood glue to the edge of one of the squares and place it vertically on the edge of another, creating a 90-degree angle. Screw in 2-inch corner brackets to secure the L shape. Don't use the screws that come with the brackets as they will be too long. Instead, use some 1/2-inch screws. Set aside those original screws though, and you will use them later. Screw in 2 more brackets and you will now have a U shape. Place a 14-inch 2x4 between the 2 side pieces to act as a temporary brace. Cut a piece of fabric that is at least 50 by 20 inches. Remove the temporary brace and line the inside of the U shape with the fabric with about 2 inches hanging over the edges. Take a staple gun and staple the fabric onto the outside of the U-shaped wood. I used a pneumatic stapler, but you can also use a regular hand staple gun. Fold the side edges in and staple around the outside of the U-shape. Again, it is very important that you are pulling the fabric taut before each staple. Now, take that 2x4 piece and wrap it in a piece of fabric. Use your stapler to wrap and secure the fabric. It's just like wrapping a package. Press the wrapped 2x4 back into the center of the U-shape. Take some of those original screws that came with the brackets and screw the 2x4 in place from the outside of the box. Now take a large piece of fabric, find the center of one edge, and staple it wrong side up to the center of the box. Now place a pool noodle from the dollar store and center it on the box, tucking it in against the stapled fabric. Wrap the fabric over the noodle, pulling the fabric taut and securing it with the staple in the center. Continue to staple around the pool noodle, tucking it into the fabric as you go. Continue with the same process with 5 more pool noodles until the wood box is covered. This can take some time. In fact, you may feel like you are in a wrestling match with the pool noodles. Stick with it. You might occasionally need to tuck and fold some fabric before stapling in order to get a smooth finish on top of the noodles. I actually ran out of fabric and needed to piece another piece of fabric in between 2 pool noodles before continuing. This was pretty easy to do. Pull the loose fabric at the end of the wrapped pool noodles over the edge of the bottom wood and staple along the inside edge so you have a clean finish. Cut away any excess fabric. I hope this inspired you to take some wood, some fabric, and some pool noodles and create your own comfy and stylish ottoman.